item number 7, and that is the adoption of an urgency ordinance to prohibit the issuance of permits for the construction of water wells in certain areas of the San Mateo County Mid-Coast. Ms. Grote?
Thank you, President Church, board members, and executive staff. As indicated, this is a recommendation to enact and a 45-day moratorium on new wells in 7 specific subbasins in the mid-coast area. There would then be an opportunity and possibility to extend that 45-day period for another 22 months, which would result in basically a 2-year temporary moratorium on new wells in those specific areas. This recommendation is based on data indicated or included in the Phase 2 Mid-Coast Groundwater Study, which was conducted by Kleinfelder and Associates between the years 2004 and 2008. This study identified basically 6 aquifers in the mid-coast area with 21 sub-areas or sub-basins. All 21 of those sub-areas are shown on the overhead in front of you now. Generally, the study concluded that mid-coast aquifers during areas or years of average rainfall will have surpluses or can have surpluses of groundwater. However, in dry years, many of the aquifers run the risk of deficits in the groundwater supply. This leads to the possibility of saltwater incursion in specific areas, and that means that saltwater actually infiltrates the groundwater and affects the groundwater quality. The study also found that this is more typically likely to occur in granitic aquifers rather than more alluvial aquifers. So those that have hard rock surfaces, or what are called basements, are more likely to have this this deficit as opposed to more alluvial or non-rock based basements or subsurfaces. What the Phase 2 study also further recommended is that the county do additional data collection and research into all of the aquifers as identified in this study, and that we conduct a Phase 3 study. We are in the process of doing that. We have contracted with our Resource Conservation District, the RCD, and they are in the process of implementing Phase 3. We do expect that at the end of Phase 3 there will be recommendations having to do with groundwater extraction, monitoring, control, as well as distribution. So those recommendations will be forthcoming at the end of Phase 3. In the meantime, however, we are recommending that in 7 specific subbasins, as identified in the Phase 2 study, that there be an interim moratorium on new wells in those areas, and those are shown in this purple area. And that is a close-up of the 7 areas. It's the Montera Terrace, the lower Montera Creek sub-area, the Lighthouse sub-area, upper and lower Moss Beach sub-areas, the Dean Creek sub-area, and the Portola sub-area. So those are shown in detail on the overhead. These are the areas that the report indicated are perhaps the most likely to have a deficit in groundwater and potentially have saltwater incursion into that groundwater. The moratorium would affect all new wells, so that would be agricultural as well as domestic wells. It would be privately owned wells, as in addition to special district wells. It would not affect those existing wells that need either repair and maintenance or that have failed and need to be re-drilled on the same piece of property. So existing wells that are undergoing repair, maintenance, or have failed and need replacement on the same property would not be part of this moratorium. So it's new wells. We would also recommend, based on a suggestion from the public, that monitoring wells not be included in the moratorium. So those wells that are specifically for the purposes of determining groundwater elevations, size, quantity, and quality, and for no other purpose, so not intended for a water source for any other purpose or use, would be excluded from the moratorium. So that would be our recommendation before you for consideration today. It would affect approximately 21 projects that are currently in process. There are 16 planning permits currently being reviewed for coastal development permit applications. We also have 3 additional applications for wells in the Environmental Health Department that would that cannot be acted upon until either a coastal development permit or an exception is granted. So those would be 3 additional in-process projects that would be affected by this, and we have 2 building permits that are currently in process. So it would affect about 21 permits. We would be doing further research in the 45 days, should this be approved today on a temporary basis, to see if there are other older projects that have received a coastal development permit but have not yet moved forward to either environmental health or our building division for a building permit. So there is the potential for an impact on some other or additional projects. But with that, I'll conclude the brief staff report. We're available to help answer questions.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Grote. Any questions at this point? Okay, then we will move on to the speakers. And again, I'd ask that everyone limit their comments to 2 minutes each. David Hankin, followed by Jack Olson.
Thank you, Mr. President, Supervisors.
Thank you.
My name is Dave Hankin. I'm a resident of Moss Beach, which is the upper Moss Beach sub-area aquifer. I think it's possible my question may have just been answered, but I'm seeking clarification about a project which is actually in progress at this point in time. So it's not a future issue, and it's not grandfathered in terms of historical. It has to do with a project which is currently under construction at the intersection of Admiral and Stetson. I've written a letter that's got all the APN numbers. I have been in communication with Mr. Peterson about this. There's a letter that you were copied on October 26th about this as well. The well drilling process and permitting process is a multi-step process. Obviously, there's the issue of the drilling permit, that's PE 4666, certification, which is a county approval process, a different step, and a permit to operate, which is yet a 3rd step. There are at least 3 and more steps in this process. To my knowledge, these wells have certainly been drilled, but have not yet either been tested officially by the county or approved. So it was unclear to me as to where they fall in this process. Further in conversations with Mr. Peterson, it's clear that one of the wells was damaged. In order for it to come into production, it would need to be reconstructed or repaired. So my questions really, and maybe this would be directed to the the department, would be: would this restriction prohibit reconstruction of the damaged well? Would it prohibit certification of either of the wells, or perhaps restrict the issuance of a permit to operate? Secondary related issue, we have, again, in conversations with Mr. Peterson, understand that the property owner is looking to actually use both of these wells together to qualify for a flow permit. Now, these wells are spaced less than 20 feet apart. The county ordinance requires a spacing of 50 feet. The property owner is entitled for an exemption. We ask that you provide guidance, if possible, that because this is a sensitive area, that the exemptions not be issued. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Jack Olson, followed by Charles Kissick.
President Church, honorable board members, as I stated earlier, water is the lifeblood of agriculture. And looking at these areas, we do have significant areas of ag production that could be impacted by a moratorium. But realizing you have a responsibility to protect public health and safety, I would like to offer a recommendation that for construction of new agricultural water wells, we use the established Certificate of Need Committee that reviews farm labor housing, which includes the Ag Commissioner, UC Cooperative Extension, Farm Bureau, Environmental Health, and County Planning, and that we have that as an opportunity. This committee can generally meet and make a decision within 48 or 72 hours because we don't know what the future holds. We've been through 2 years of drought. Right now, things aren't looking to be the best. And as most of the agriculture in this area is depending upon riparian corridor and riparian diversion, if we run into issues where Fish and Game and other agencies may take those water sources away, we may be facing the necessity of having to come up with alternative water sources where wells may be the opportunity. The good thing with agriculture is that the quality of the water does not necessarily have to be quite as good as it does for residential. So there are options of looking in aquifers that wouldn't be looked at traditionally for domestic purposes, but other venues. And we would like to request that some type of a provision for agricultural wells be put in and added to protect the economic viability of agriculture, because we've all seen Paul Rodriguez and the drama that's happened in the Central Valley this past year. We really don't want to see that coming to San Mateo County with unemployment rates of 40 and 50%, where people have had their jobs taken away because the Central Valley Project couldn't deliver their water. So we would ask that a provision be made to allow some flexibility through the Certificate of Need Committee and allow us an opportunity to continue the viability of our agricultural economy in this county. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, Charles Kissick, followed by Judy Taylor.
Hello, my name is Charles Kissick. I live in Montera, and I'm not just a concerned citizen, I'm also a registered geologist, licensed civil engineer, and a registered hydrogeologist. And I have my own company in Princeton, and I've done many groundwater studies. I worked on the 1989 Kleinfelder study doing field data collection, and I'm currently in charge of groundwater monitoring for the Devil's Slide Tunnel project. And I have a well in Montera. And when I saw the Kleinfelder report, my first conclusion was, based on their main conclusion, was that more study needs to be done. They didn't come up with any final decisions on anything. And so to me it seems premature to have a well moratorium, as the data is not quite there yet. And as for saltwater intrusion, that's not a foregone conclusion. They said it might happen, perhaps, maybe, sometimes, but they don't really know yet. I know of wells right by the bluffs that are hundreds of feet deep, and they're fine. And so that would indicate that the saltwater intrusion is not that imminent in those areas. And also, Kleinfelder did not talk to me. I have a well. They never asked me about my well. They didn't talk to Richard Henry, who has done about probably 90% of the pump tests in that area, and I've done many myself as the registered geologist. I know of wells in that area, in the moratorium area, that make easily 50 gallons a minute or more, and they recover within minutes when you turn off the pump. So again, based on all those concerns, this just seems premature. And it's just an analogy would be you go to a doctor because you have a sore leg and think you might have cancer. The doctor said, well, I don't know, I didn't find anything, but let's cut the leg off anyway. That's basically what the analogy is. So that's all.
Okay, thank you. Judy Taylor, followed by James Larmar.
Good morning. I definitely put on my snarky pants this morning, and I will promise to go home and read How to Win Friends and Influence People. This kind of thing makes me very, very angry, and my anger is based on my fear. Statistically, I've probably got another 30 years to go, and we only need to look back to September of 2001 to realize how quickly things can change. And I am so upset at my community because I've listened to the rhetoric for more than 30 years. And at the end of the day, there is nothing that my community can point to and say, this is how you do it right. All we are doing, if you look at strategic planning, you look at what your risks, you look at your dangers, you look at the challenges you're facing, and then you look at what your assets and your resources are. And at the end of the day, the only thing that my community wants to do is to say no more building. I can tell you that if you don't grandfather some of these people that are into the Planning Commission and into Building Department, they will end up in foreclosure. That is going to have a long-term effect, not just on them, but on their families as well. I understand the political reality of dealing with people who check their critical thinking when they walk into the voter booth. I recently saw a bumper sticker that has kind of become my motto, and that was, "I can't, we can." I could do better, but for the most part, I do about as good as I can. I need my community, I need institutional support to do better. A couple of years ago, I was in Lewisburg, West Virginia, a place that doesn't hit anybody's list on how to live green, and I saw these sleeves that they have on their trees there that collect rainwater and then disperse it into the ground. My voice is shaking here because we're now seeing them in the city. In San Francisco, they've got curbside compost recycling. We've got eucalyptus trees and pine trees that are not native, that are sponges, that are soaking up our groundwater, and they're blocking our free heat. And when do we get to have the conversations about what we who live there now should be doing about this? Why is it always the person who hasn't built yet that is supposed to fix our problems? Thank you.
Thank you. James Larimar, followed by Paul McGregor.
Hi, I'm Jim Larmer. I'm a 22-year resident of the Coastside, and I'm also elected to the Coastside County Water District Board of Directors, but I'm here today to speak for myself. I read the Kleinfeld report. In fact, I have the summary right here, and I'm surprised that you would take any action based on it. It clearly states that it doesn't have adequate data. It makes 9 recommendations and 1 supplemental recommendation, 10 in total. 7 of those are to collect more data. So I think what you have here is a report that overwhelmingly makes the point that it doesn't have enough data to draw any conclusions, yet you're proposing to take an action based on this report. That doesn't make any sense to me whatsoever. I think the problem is that you have a public utility serving this area, which has had a 30-year moratorium on water services. The problem that needs to be addressed is to get that problem solved. This urgency ordinance that you're thinking of passing will actually create another disincentive to solving that problem, which has been in existence for 30 years, all the time I've lived on the coast, and for 10 years prior to that. Thank you.
Thank you. Paul McGregor, followed by Paul McGregor Jr.
You got it right.
Okay.
Paul McGregor.
Thank you.
Good morning, board.
Good morning.
Well moratorium. I really have questions that need answers. Why is there such a rush to impose a moratorium on wells? My understanding, 1 well has failed in the Moss Beach area. This well was drilled in 1991, prior to the new well ordinance taking effect. The new ordinance has put wells in with much more stringent requirements. My question is, has any of the new wells under this ordinance failed? I would say no, because nobody's come to the table and said, I've got a problem with my well with this new ordinance. I believe that if MWSD would get their act together and give us the water they have promised for years, we would not be talking about this right now. MWSD has burdened Montara and Moss Beach with $18 million of debt and hasn't done enough to solve our water issues. I've built 10 homes in the last 10 years. Each well with permits, drilling, filtration, tanks, etc. cost me anywhere from $35,000 to $50,000 that could be going to the district. My question is, when are they going to give us water that we need? I would also say that the people that have their applications in at this point in time be grandfathered in because of the financial hardship you're going to put them through if you put them through this moratorium. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Paul McGregor Jr. And following Mr. McGregor, we will take a brief 5-minute break. Good morning.
Good morning, everyone. I'm a little nervous here. My name's Paul McGregor Jr. I applied for my well permit June 10th of this year. I paid approximately $1,500 to start this well permit process. During this process, the Coastal Commission decided to get involved, which stopped my process for well approval. I have put all my life savings into this property, including my college savings and all the money I have saved from working. I have done everything the county has asked for of me to perform. My property is in an exemption zone, and the Coastal Commission should have not been involved at all. They have jeopardized my entire life savings by their actions. I've also spent an additional $3,000 for a chain of title report and for a certification of compliance. This paperwork has been in for some time and waiting for the final approval from Lisa Grote. I'm asking that my well permit application be grandfathered and allow me to drill my well. I'd also like to ask just to be shown or something which well or why it is that they keep saying that this area has a failing process of the water. I'm young at this, as you can tell, I'm very nervous, but I don't understand why if one person freaks out about maybe something small and it spreads like wildfire, like someone else said earlier about the doctor incident. You go in for your leg having a bump and they assume it's cancer and they want to say cut it off when someone else didn't get a second opinion on it or something like that. Thank you very much for everyone's time here today.
Okay, thank you. And we're going to take a brief break, and when we come back, we will hear from Carrie Burke, followed by Cal. Okay, we are back from our break, and the next speaker will be Carrie Burke, followed by Jan Gray.
Good morning again, members of the board. I have supplied you with two letters, one that I wrote comments on the Kleinfelder study back in June when I reviewed the document, and my first statement was, given the disclaimer that the study did not complete the task of determining, quote, safe yield data, it would seem unwise to significantly change the current policies regarding well development. And that's kind of in just the conclusion that the study really didn't recommend a well ordinance and that the data is really not complete. I also would like to read into the record a letter from Aaron Lingerman. He's the owner of Earth Flow Drilling, and I've worked with that company for a couple decades. And it goes, I am a third-generation water well driller on the coast. We have installed many of the domestic wells in the Moss Beach, Montero area over the last 10 years. I've had no complaints of any well problems on any of the wells that I have drilled in the mid-coast. My father, along with other groundwater professionals and geologists, recently served on the advisory committee to develop the new well ordinance. It includes rigorous testing in the mid-coast to ensure that every well meets the flow requirements and that the quality guidelines be for a safe, reliable water source. The Kleinfelder study includes a lot of good information but does not warrant the adoption of an urgency ordinance. It does not conclude that we have an overdraft situation in the mid-coast. We cannot take away landowners' right to water under their property based upon the perspective of a potential of future water problems. I hope you will consider waiting for the next phase of the groundwater study before amending the well ordinance. Thank you, Aaron Lingerman. So just in conclusion, I do think that there isn't enough data now to warrant a moratorium, but I also agree with Jack Olson's condition for agriculture. We must also consider the impacts to the agricultural water sources and not do an ordinance at this time. And I think there'll be some more data. If we have more monitoring data, we'll have more things to consider in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Jan Gray, followed by Catherine Slater-Carter.
Good morning, President Church and members of the board. My name is Jan Gray, and I am speaking on behalf of the San Mateo County Board Association of Realtors. We strongly encourage the board to reject the proposal of the emergency ordinance that would prohibit the issue of well permits. SAMCAR does understand why there may be a need for reasonable, tailored approach to resolving groundwater management. However, enacting a moratorium is, in our view, an overboard and unnecessary approach that directly impacts the property rights of those owners on the mid-coast. Additionally, we believe that an emergency ordinance is premature. Phase 3 of the county's study is still in progress, and until we finalize the Phase 3's findings, we need to have more data to determine the best remedy. I've been on the coast for 41 years. The water district that serves Moss Beach and Montara has not issued a permit since 1981. That's 28 years. The only solution for some of these people is to drill a well, which is allowed by county law. As previously stated, there are 940 of them drilled. As previously stated, everybody wants to lower the growth rate to 40 on the mid-coast. That would not have a big impact on any aquifer. And until we have full data, we really shouldn't be making decisions that impact people who are in process or thinking of building. It's an onerous process at best, and this just seems to be one way to stop them. I try to remain very cognizant of what's going on the coast. To my knowledge, there is only one failed well in Moss Beach. The house number name is 711 Etheldor. I don't know how they've gotten water for the last 6 years. Hose from a neighbor, trucks from abroad, who knows? But that's the situation, and I thank you.
Thank you. Catherine Slater Carter, followed by Vic Abadi.
Thank you.
Okay.
Good morning.
Good morning.
To continue the health analogy, this well moratorium, temporary well moratorium, is much like a physician recommending exercise and a healthy diet to avoid a heart attack. In 1989, there was a Kleinfelder study for 56 or 59 wells. Since then, 946 new wells have gone in, with no environmental review for their cumulative impact on coastal resources. How can we do it right? Someone asked. I'll tell you how. Let's have the county work with Montara Water and Sanitary District and Coastside County Water District to create a reliable, sustainable water supply that will meet the needs of the urban mid-coast through build-out. The well moratorium will not stop building on wells because there are a fair number of vacant lots that already have wells on them. You can see them as you drive through the area. These will not be affected by this well moratorium, so building will continue. We are, however, entering our 4th year of drought. This is more than 10 years of drought in the last 30 years, according to the Department of Water Resources. In the letter that I submitted with this, it says that even the areas in El Granada and Miramar may have been subject to saltwater intrusion. This will have an impact on all of the coastside and our coastal resources. The map that I have here shows the orange with the dots is the county recommended temporary well moratorium area. The solid line here is the Coastal Commission recommended area. You can see the Coastal Commission area recommends or includes all of the areas with high densities of wells. The county not only does not, it leaves out the very, very sensitive area of Seal Cove, which in 1972, the Board of Supervisors was considering not even allowing building there because there are so many problems there with earthquake faults and a lack of water supply. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Vic Abadi, followed by Paul Perkovic.
Thank you. Good morning. Vic Abadi, geologist. I'm a California licensed geologist. Lived in Montero nearly 3 decades. I oppose the water moratorium. It's premature because we just don't have the data. The recent Kleinfelder report admits that, but this county and other public entities have commissioned quite a lot of water studies over the last 3 decades. They've all been inconclusive. They pretty much uniformly said that we need more data. Specifically, the county has never monitored wells on the mid-coast. You don't know what you have. You don't know how the wells perform, whether in good years or drought years. You don't know whether or not they interfere with one another. There's no evidence that they do. But until you can compile the data, you should leave the situation as it is. Perhaps if you get the data, then someday you could support a moratorium, but right now it's premature and it brings undue hardship on property owners. So I think you should consider spending the money in the future to compile the data we need from water wells. As of 2004, the well ordinance changed. We now have existing requirements in place to prevent problem wells from occurring. I don't think you need to add a moratorium to that. The Montero Water and Sanitary District has done an excellent job of improving water supply, increasing water supply since it took over the water district a few years ago. And I'm confident that they will succeed in eventually providing water supply to enable new hookups. But until then, wells are the only source of water for private property owners, and I think you need to allow them to continue to drill wells until MWSD continues its good work and provides new water hookups. Is that my time limit?
Yes, it is.
I'll stop. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. Paul Perkovic, followed by Fran Pollard.
Mr. President, I respectfully ask you to honor my request to allow me to speak after our district counsel, Dave Schricker, has presented a legal opinion on behalf of the district.
Okay.
And I'd also like to ask staff if they could put up plate 6 from the Kleinfelder study on the big screen, because it is referenced in the ordinance, and I think the audience should have an opportunity to see the actual document on which the various plates are based. No, that is not plate 6. Plate 6 shows the wells that are in the area. And that's an important part of the discussion, I believe.
Okay.
And so I'll yield until after
All right.
Schricker has spoken.
Thank you. Mr. Schricker, why don't you come up now?
Mr. President, members of the board, I'm David Schricker, the attorney for the Montero Water and Sanitary District. My purpose is to raise a narrow legal issue with respect to the proposed ordinance. One of the legislative purposes of the district as a county water district is to develop new water resources, and the district has done that since its ownership for 5 years. If the proposed ordinance were interpreted or applied in a manner which would preclude development of wells, either exploratory wells or production wells, our legal position is that that would be void. We have case authority to substantiate that, and so I think either as a matter of interpretation, but preferably as a matter of redrafting, we would respectfully request that the ordinance be redrafted to exclude community water providers. It's a term of art under the law, but water resources with respect to community services have a priority, a legal priority based upon case law and water rights over private wells. Consequently, the board actually supports, if I understand correctly, and you'll hear further from them, supports the moratorium on new wells, except insofar as it might be interpreted or applied to preclude development of water resources by the district. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Perkovic?
Thank you. With that as background, I'd like to, first of all, Good morning again. I am president of the board of the Montero Water and Sanitary District, and I appreciate Vic Abbott's kind comments. We have been working with the Coastal Commission, which certified our Public Works Plan Phase 1 in November of last year, and which would allow us to bring our new Alta Vista well into production to serve the community. That well was test pumped several years ago for a very short period at 300 gallons per minute. We've applied at the Coastal Commission for permission to pump at 150 gallons per minute on average, and then with the possibility of increasing that pumping rate if the biological and hydrological monitoring studies show that it has a safe yield that would support that. With that additional supply, once it becomes a permanent part of our district's water sources, we will be probably able to take action to lift the moratorium and bring many of the existing properties that have been developed on wells into the district service as contemplated by your ordinance, which I cited earlier. I think that we've had a very good experience in working with Coastal Commission staff. They are supportive of serving existing properties. The other comment I'd like to make is that Citizens Utilities, a private company, operated the water system that served Montero and Moss Beach for many, many years, and it provided horrible service. In 1976, during a drought, the entire water system went dry. In 1986 and 1987, again, it failed. Those were the events that prompted the community to take action, organize to get authority to purchase the water system, approve a bond measure, and acquire the water system, which we did in August of 2003. We've made a lot of progress in the last 6 years. We want to bring our new water source online. Citizens Utilities operated with 60% of its water supply on a revocable encroachment permit basis that could be cut off in 6 months. A water utility cannot supply water to a community when its primary water source can be yanked out from under it on 6 months' notice. We're working with the county to try to resolve that issue so that we can assure long-term access to the water supply necessary to meet our community needs. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Fran Pollard, followed by Ron Nelson.
Good morning again, Board. I'm Fran Pollard of El Granada, been there 38 years. I think that I am in support of prohibiting more private wells, especially for building homes. Now, maybe for agriculture, that's a different story, but until the studies are complete, just adding more and more wells is going to exacerbate the problem we have. There's limited water on the coast. We're not going to get any more from Hetch Hetchy or San Francisco. If local districts can develop more water, it's not going to be a whole lot. We're in a drought period now. I was here when the last drought happened. There were a lot more failures of wells back then, and this could happen again. So I just hope that, and I would like to extend the prohibition all along the coast, especially near the ocean and at sea level. I can't imagine allowing more and more wells to be drilled along the ocean front and where it's sea level, because there is saltwater intrusion as we get further into the drought. I guess that's it. And I support what Montero board members and the attorney said. I agree with them that something has to be done to curtail some of this. Thank you.
Thank you. Ron Nelson, followed by Jim Wilkinson.
Morning, members of the board. My name is Ron Nelson. I've lived on the coast since 1968. I'm also a builder, so I have some interest here on the wells. You know, for the last 30 years, we've tried to develop parts of Montero, and there's never been an attempt by Montero Water and Sanitary District to supply us with water. Hence, we've been drilling wells. We would all like to be on a public water system where we could just pay the fees like we do at Coastside Water, get our permit, and not have to drill, take the chance that we take as builders that something might happen to that well. So I don't know why it's taken so long for them to get their act together. as far as this report that you've been discussing this morning, the Kleinfeld report, if the info going in is faulty, I see no reason to act on it. I mean, you don't have a problem yet, but it seems like there's a stampede to do something, even if it's wrong. I think, a moratorium now is premature. I think maybe some of the other gentlemen have said that having a study done by some of the people who actually tested these wells and having staff meet with them and the hydrologists from the county might be of some significant help in determining if there is a problem with the wells, if there is any kind of saltwater intrusion, which I've drilled 30 or 40. I've never had a problem with any of my wells. As far as saltwater intrusion, haven't had any problem with my wells as far as capacity. So I think that more needs to be looked at here. I think it would be helpful to talk to some of the local people who work on the wells and meet with staff from the county and take a closer look, rather than having someone who has a report made. I'm out of time. Anyway.
Yes.
Junk in, junk out. I think we need to back off this moratorium and find some new information that's correct and something that makes some sense.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Jim Wilkinson, followed by Leonard Warren.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity, Mr. Church and the rest of the board. As you probably know, that we're the only complete drilling service left in San Mateo County. I've been working for 25 years in the drilling business. We've looked a lot at the geology, at the of what we have as resources on the coast. Yes, as others have said, saltwater intrusion in this particular area of the coast where they're talking about the moratorium has not been an issue. I can recall one issue where we drilled on a fault line and we did get a little bit of saltwater intrusion coming up from lower basement formations. It's not common, but you can run into anything anywhere. I feel confident that even within this region of the moratorium that's being proposed, that we could put in some 50 and 100 gallon a minute wells that would produce in this area. It's true, sort of like the body, you have arteries and veins and capillaries. Certain areas are only going to give a low flow like a capillary would do. But for residential uses, that's adequate. It takes a lot of pressure off of the public water system when they do not have to be responsible for all of the water that's being supplied. Being good stewards, we don't have to be just tunnel vision and think about just the water district supplying. We need to consider our other sources and use our resources properly. And I think that this is not going to be beneficial on the long-term water picture on the coast by thinking in terms of moratoriums and reducing the drilling, considering the small usage that these wells produce.
Okay, thank you. Sabrina Brennan, followed by, Leonard Warren, followed by Sabrina Brennan.
Again, good morning, Mr.
Good morning.
President, honorable supervisors. I'm going to try and talk real fast because there's no way that I could cover everything I'd like to say here. But most notably, the claims that we've never had a saltwater intrusion problem, we don't have widespread well failures and them drying up. What I think is a really good analogy to that is you have a boat with a certain capacity, but you're not sure what the capacity is. But you just keep letting people on saying the boat hasn't sunk yet. Well, the problem is when that one last person gets on, the boat sinks and everybody drowns. And so what we have is some amount of water with a whole bunch of straws in it. You don't know how much water that is, but you keep allowing more straws. And once there are too many straws in there for drought years, then everybody's in trouble. You cannot afford the risk of reaching that point because we're not in a drought right now, and continuing to allow more and more wells without knowing what the true capacity is folly and exposes the county to widespread lawsuits if there are widespread well failures, which I think there will be. The emergency interim ordinance needs to include the whole urbanized mid-coast and exempt only the rural areas and potentially ag. I'm not sure how I feel about that, so I'm not going to comment on the ag issue. I don't want to see the farms fail. One of the other problems with wells, I have a well, full disclosure. It's a very productive well with terrible, terrible water, highly corrosive, 30 grains hardness, cuts glass, literally cuts glass. If I don't get a water connection from CCWD soon, I'm going to be installing a water softener. Now, what's the problem with water softeners? Over at SAM, we're trying to do recycled water. Water softeners dump salt into the system. We just supplied test water to Ocean Colony Golf Course, and their complaint is salt. So the more wells you allow, the more salt there's going to be in the system, the harder it's going to be for us to supply recycled water. Thank you.
Thank you. Sabrina Brennan, followed by Lenny Roberts.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I'm speaking on behalf of Area 29, a group of citizens advocating on behalf of critical coastal Area 29. Area 29 strongly supports the Coastal Commission recommended prohibition of new drinking water wells in the urban mid-coast, including Seal Cove. I'd like to point out on the map that Seal Cove is the white area along the coast that has not been included in the most recent study by Kleinfelder and also not included in the current study. I'm going to read a few highlights from an EIR prepared in 1989 by Kleinfelder with regards to the Upper Seal Cove subunit. Water balance appears to indicate that little or no surplus water is available in the aquifer. Upper Seal Cove hydraulic subunits are areas where difficult well drilling, low yields, and low reliability of yields can be expected. Wells constructed in these areas may go dry in areas of deficient recharge, and homes lacking water during dry periods are likely to require supplemental public services. Please include Upper Seal Cove in the prohibition of new private drinking water wells in the urban mid-coast. Saltwater intrusion has been reported in Seal Cove, and I'd also like to point out that because of some of the water issues in Seal Cove, people with wells in Seal Cove are not particularly excited about the idea of having their wells tested, which is why Kleinfelder has not been able to test in the last study and also in the current study. Something needs to be done about that. There needs to be a test well dug or something because we need to have our area included in the study. Thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you. Lenny Roberts, followed by Carlisle and Yana.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning again. I'm Lenny Roberts speaking for Committee for Green Foothills, and I wanted to support including the Seal Cove area as part of the moratorium because it was water deficient in 1989, as Sabrina Brennan has just spoken about, and it wasn't included in the Kleinfelder study that because there was nobody willing to have their well tested. So it's demonstrated deficient in water, and it should be included in the moratorium. I also want to support Mr. Schricker's comments on behalf of Montero Water and Sanitary District. It is very important to have the public water supply adequately serve the community, and the Montero Water and Sanitary District has been diligently pursuing new groundwater supplies, and if the well, as they have, their Alta Vista well is producing at such a good rate, and they've been working with the Coastal Commission, I think that public water supply needs to be allowed to go forward. So just on the basis of my other comments earlier today, I would say when you're dealing with a community resource such as water, the precautionary principle should be applied. In other words, you don't wait until you're out of it. You have to be very conservative about how you're going to deal with a limited resource. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Carlisle Ann Yana, followed by Terry Gossett.
Carlisle Young, not Younga, in Moss Beach. I've been a Moss Beach Seal Cove resident and lot owner for 21 years. The entire time, the MWSD, prior to that, was Citizens Utilities, all had a water moratorium that has never been lifted. So I basically am speaking on behalf of property owners such as myself, stating that if no wells can be drilled, including the Moss Beach and Montara areas, whether or not you include Seal Cove, that leaves no kind of alternative to any property owners who may wish to build, because no other water source is currently available. So I would hope that you would postpone this aspect of a moratorium, a further moratorium, even if it's what Lisa said, 45 days temporary or interim, and could be extended for 22 more months. You know, they've had a 30-year moratorium, or 28 years already, for the public water supply. I would rather see them be allowed to issue water permits to more people than to see landowners get left out of the process. And also, if you look at that map, you will see that a lot of the wells are actually in the CCWD area, and they are supplying water to people. So I'm not aware of any wells besides the one at 711 Etheldor that has actually failed on the area that you're talking about. Lastly, I know the big wave people were here talking about the Coastal Act, LCP update, and they're on an ag well where they are, and they're trying to build, 50 residential and 225,000 square foot office park. They don't even have water. So just let the little property owners have a chance and not give them an unjust taking, because if you could leave them no alternative to build whatsoever, that's what you're doing.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Yan. Looks like an A at the end of your name, by the way. Terry Gossett.
Hello, honorable supervisors and staff. My name is Terry Gossett from Moss Beach, speaking on behalf of Californians for Property Rights. I just am thinking of all the hundreds of meetings that you've attended about Mid-Coast water and how long I've listened, and I just marvel at your stamina. I'm just crazed. I think maybe I had some prepared comments, but I think maybe I'd offer up another one. Mr. Perkovic offered up a challenge to work with CCWD and your offices to go ahead and help them get off the moratorium. So rather than considering an urgency ordinance to deny 100 private wells at a cost of $35,000 to $50,000 apiece, I would urge you consider a urgent ordinance to assist MWSD to drill 2 more wells and get off their water moratorium. That would make so much sense. I can hardly believe it. And then we could just stop this subject and go on to some other valuable, interesting things on the coast. Now to my prepared remarks. We've all read the Kleinfelder Mid-Coast Groundwater Study, and I urge you to take heed to some of the professional comments you heard from Kissick, Burke, Larmer, Olson, Abady, Nelson, Wilkinson, and others. When I read your staff recommendation, I felt it very odd that you're putting a restriction on private wells just as we enter our rainy season. The other thing I felt that was kind of odd was that there was no fiscal impact. And I was thinking of our economy and how harsh everything is for all the people trying to live anywhere, but especially on the coast. And the fiscal impact could be huge, not only to the homeowners and the people losing their investment, but also to the revenues to the county. So I would urge you to reconsider the fiscal impact of this emergency ordinance, and I strongly oppose it. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Gossett. And that is our last speaker. And that brings it back to the board. I do have, I think I'll start it off with one question. The ordinance is an urgency ordinance, and that sort of implies that the threat of saltwater intrusion is fairly imminent. And I'd like to hear from staff on that subject. Has Kleinfelder suggested a moratorium? How imminent does he feel it is? I understand the argument that it's important to take a conservative approach so that you don't get in a situation where you run out of water. Is there a point where you will know that that is a distinct possibility?
Good morning, Mr. President, members of the board.
Good morning.
Dean Peterson, I'm the Director of Environmental Health for your county. And to answer that question, I actually need to go back a few years, President, and that's to discuss the changes that occurred in the 2004 changes to our ordinance. At that time was when we were beginning the study for Kleinfelder, and at that time it was decided that we needed to make our ordinance a little more stringent in this particular area to make sure that we were hitting the hurdles that we needed to. And so part of that, as has been alluded by a number of individuals, was that the ordinance is very strict. It's probably one of the strictest in California as far as allowing a water well for residential use to go in. Part of that had to do with there is a requirement in the mid-coast area to test for chlorides. In all other areas of the county, if you find chlorides above a state drinking water standard, you're allowed to put treatment on that. However, in the mid-coast, if you find chlorides above the state drinking water standard, you are not allowed to put a well in, or you're not allowed to put treatment on. That was done with the intent to help make sure that we weren't going to be seeing saltwater intrusion coming into the coast. So kind of a roundabout question was, is saltwater intrusion imminent? In my professional opinion, both as an engineer and as the Director of Environmental Health, no, it is not imminent. However, we do have to take a look at the precautionary principles. And when we looked at the Kleinfelder report, while the Kleinfelder report does not come out and specifically say, they give percentages based on very dry years, based on dry years, based on normal years, the percentages of the possibility that you will see a potential increase in saltwater intrusion. And so when we take a look at all those numbers trying to identify when's that going to happen, you're not going to be able to put that in there. But again, you can look at it on a very conservative approach and say, well, we know that eventually it may happen. We don't know what that number is. We don't know how many people are going to get onto the boat. And so we felt it was an opportunity to take a step back to allow the Phase 3 study to continue. That will give us a lot more engaging information on the streams, a better information of what's actually flowing into the aquifers, and at that point to decide the next possible step.
And when will the Phase 3 study be completed?
On that, I think I'll ask planning to answer that.
Okay, thank you, Dean.
It's scheduled to be completed by the end of this year, so the end of 2009 we'll have a completion, at least recommendations.
The end of this year?
The end of this year, 2009,
All right,
to bring recommendations to you.
All right.
30 days?
It will be completed within 30 days. Correct.
Okay, so we'll know quite a bit more then when that's completed.
We will have additional information. There may still be recommendations for further data collection, further monitoring, but we will have more information than we have at this point.
Okay, thank you. Other questions?
And a reminder to the board that by law this comes back in 45 days to the board if the board chooses to act today. If it did, but it's going to come back anyway in 45 days.
Okay, thank you. Supervisor Gordon?
Yeah, so I'm a little chagrined. Supervisor Groom and I sat as members of the Environmental Quality Committee and heard this report and had the discussion. And I guess I certainly wasn't aware that the Phase 3 study would be completed by the end of December. So if we're going to complete the Phase 3 study by the end of December, I'm inclined to wait 30 days to get that data.
And I do need to make a minor correction. It's January 31st, so it's the end of January rather than the end of December, but it is the end of January.
And I guess the question I have, we've been, it seems like ever since I got here 12 years ago, we've been doing these water studies. And every time we come back with, we don't have enough data. Do we have enough? I mean, is this going to finally be conclusive, Lisa? I mean, will this, or Dean? I mean, what do we need to do to get to conclusion on these studies?
Through the President. As I've often said as an engineer, geology is not a science, it's not an exact science, it's an art form. Sorry, geologists in the room. So that's a question, and I've been doing these types of studies for my entire career, whether it has to do with contamination, whether it has to do with water infiltration, with slope stability. These things, you'll never get to an absolute conclusion. Because there is so much out there that we don't know. We're talking about, the ability to take a look at a large area and try and determine to try and interpret that based on one little boring that's going down and assuming we know what's going on. Now, the more data we get, the better that data gap is filled in. But unfortunately, the answer to your question is we will never be completely certain, and that's when you need to then take into the precautionary principles again and look at it on a conservative basis.
No, and I'm very aware of the precautionary principles and very supportive of them. I mean, I think that, the last, last well approved that creates a huge saltwater intrusion into hundreds of wells would be a real serious problems for me. So I'm not sure we're. I mean, I was prepared originally to support this today, but I'm kind of questioning that. I do think that at some point we need to have this once we get the right science. And I thought the moratorium. I mean, originally when we talked about it, because it would go into effect and could be continued for up to 2 years, I thought this study was a much longer one than what we're currently led to believe.
Other comments? Supervisor Groom?
Thank you. Mr. President, I would like to echo Supervisor Gordon's comments. I thought that the Kleinfelder study was several years away and that this was the right decision for the county to make in light of the facts that we've already learned in the first phase 1 of the groundwater study. So I think that I would like to delay this until we get phase 3 and have it analyzed and have a report back. But I would also like to ask a question, since I haven't been dealing with water for 12 years. Has there ever been a forum, Supervisor Gordon, that was suggested by some of the gentlemen and ladies here today, that we have a builder and a well digger forum and maybe look at another way of conducting a survey? Gather them together and have a conversation with them and see what we can learn from. Have we ever done that?
Well, when the ordinance was 2014, we did the change. Prior to the adoption of the ordinance in 2004, there was a task force that worked on this issue, which included a range of interests, including technical expertise. And that's what led to the ordinance. That doesn't preclude bringing some of those folks back in for some further discussion. It may be something that, under the auspices of the Environmental Quality Committee, we would want to do.
I think we should look at investigating that again.
Through the President, to respond to Supervisor Groom, in addition to that, the Kleinfelder report, the company was tasked to outreach to as many data points as possible, and we gave them information as far as who drillers were, geologists, and so they did have that opportunity to contact them for their data records.
Do you feel that was conclusive?
I'm not sure exactly how much Kleinfelder outreach to them,
All right.
but I do know that they have a lot of data, and we rely upon them. And not only did we use that task force in 2004, we continue to use what we call a land use task force, which keeps involved all parties involved with this, all stakeholders.
Thank you.
Supervisor Tissier?
Just a couple quick questions. Someone brought up the fact that we're getting into the rainy season, and I guess my sense is if we have 60 days that we'll get the results of this report, we're in the middle of the rainy season, perhaps we're not at that juncture where it's as critical as it could be if we were in the middle of summer, perhaps. That's just one comment. I guess the second question I have is, when we were talking earlier, Mr. Perkovic was talking about the community water services and the fact that they have a well that they've been looking at and can provide some water. What's the time frame? Would that come on board within these 60 days? Potentially? You can stay on camera. Yeah. There you go. Could all the cameras please be right there?
Supervisor Tissier, I wish I could answer that question. The Alta Vista well is included in the Public Works Plan Phase 1, which was certified by the California Coastal Commission at their November meeting last year. The commission, based on some testimony, including members of County Council who went down, flew down to that meeting and spoke in opposition to some parts of the project, as well as some neighboring residents, the commission added additional conditions, modifications, very much like they are doing for the Mid-Coast LCP update. That came back to our board. We considered those modifications and determined that they were acceptable, and our board did what your board will be doing. We accepted those changes, and the executive director of the commission recommended to the commission that it was legally satisfied the conditions. So the Public Works Plan is now a certified Coastal Commission approved plan. As soon as that happened, more Citizens for Safe Water sued the Coastal Commission for under a writ of mandamus, and as petitioners, that approval has been tied up in litigation. I can't go into details on litigation, of course, but the existence of the case is well known.
So I guess what I'm getting at is
cannot
in the 60 days.
predict when that will be resolved.
Okay,
Okay?
that's all I was asking.
Mr. President,
I think
I'd like to make a short response. I think we could think in terms of 30 to 60 days in time frame for the completion of that well to be turned into a production well. The Coastal Commission has to certify it or issue a sub-permit which would establish it as a production well. We have to complete a biological study which should be completed within 30 days. Hopefully another 30 days would put us on production.
All right.
Forget about the litigation. We're going to win that.
Okay. Thank you very much.
I'd like to move that this item be referred back to our Environmental Quality Committee.
I would second that motion.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to refer this back to the committee. Roll call, please.
Supervisor Tissier.
Aye.
President Church.
Aye.
Supervisor Groom.
Aye.
Supervisor Gordon.
Aye.
Supervisor Jacobs-Gibson.
Aye.
Okay, thank you. This item will be referred back for further review, and we will now move on to item number 8, which is this is our 10 o'clock item, which is a resolution appointing a member to the board.